40S is a ReRAM technology out of Silicon Valley. We've been working on it since 2007. We listed in 2015. So we've spent probably $60 or $70 million on it, and we're now coming to the really important end of the journey in terms of the technology development. So our technology is slightly different in terms of the way we operate the cell. And the uniqueness of the way we operate our cell is testament to the partners we've been able to attract. So we're now working with Infinian. We announced that in December last year. Infinian's a $70 billion company. It's the largest semiconductor business in Germany. Turns over about 16 billion euros, sorry. And so we've started to work with them in terms of the next stage of our development going forward. And we've been working with IMAC since 2017, Mark, that's about right, 2017. And they're one of the largest research institutes in Europe. So they have about 3,500 employees. They turn over 800 million euros, and they're not for profit. So those two partners are really important for us. And I think the uniqueness of our technology, as I said, is testament to the fact that we've been able to attract them as partners going forward. So going forward, in terms of memory, I'm just going to ask Peter a series of questions which he'll answer, and then you'll get the flavour of how we're going to fit into that architecture going forward. So, Peter, what is the memory bottleneck in the context of AI systems, and why has this become a critical issue?
Well, hello there. I hope you can all hear me fine. Pleased to join from California. My name is Peter Heim. Memory bottleneck is something that is becoming an issue across all AI systems, especially the large language models. It really refers to the fact that the processing power has scaled over the last several years much faster than memory bandwidth and memory density has. And with the AI systems needing all of this data to be as close to the compute core as possible, the bottleneck really becomes the ability to get the data in and out of the processor as fast as possible. So especially as these language models get larger and larger, the real bottleneck is becoming getting access to that data in order to run these models and not the processor itself. We've heard people say that, even with these advanced NVIDIA processors, up to 30% of that processing power goes idle, just waiting for the data to get into the processing core so it can actually run its models.
How do the memory requirements of AI workloads differ from traditional computing workloads?
Yeah, well, this is referring to what I was just talking about in terms of the data actually being needing to be near the processor core as much as possible. In traditional computing architectures, most of the data is random access, and so it can be stored far away in flash or longer-term storage medium. And then imported into the processor core only when it's needed. They run the process, they run the calculations, and then they store the results back into memory. But AI systems really turn that whole model on its head, and to the point where all of the bulk of the data needs to be as close to the compute core as possible. And so that is the big challenge right now, both in terms of cost and bandwidth and access to the memory.
So how are companies currently addressing the memory bottleneck?
Yeah, so right now, what do they have to use? They only have DRAM and high bandwidth memory, which is a form of DRAM that's stacked on top of each other. So what they have to do is they have to over provision all of this really expensive fast memory as much as possible, as close to the compute cores as possible, in order to make these things have the response times that they need. So that not only drives up cost, but it also drives up energy. I think one estimate is that 30% of the power in an AI server environment just goes to the DRAM and high bandwidth memory that's needed to keep that data access as fast as possible, just because of the constant refresh that it's needed with that kind of a memory.
So with our technology, we're sort of trying to sit between DRAM and flash, sort of closer to DRAM and further away from flash. So we've been able to show in 2023 that we've got significant levels of endurance, which means that the cells can turn on and off without failure. We've showed that into the billions of times. We've been able to show that we're as fast as a write speed as DRAM or faster, which is really, really important. and we've been able to
Mm.
sort of talk about, the new term being talked about now in terms of retention, like how long the information's retained, is now managed retention. So we don't need to be holding the information for hours, weeks, years. It can just be seconds. So Peter, you want to sort of talk about the difference between managed retention differing from technologies like DRAM and flash?
Well, managed retention is a new paradigm that's being talked about, specifically for these AI systems, because these systems don't need to have flash-like memory. You don't need to keep this data for years. An hour or two, or maybe a day, may be enough in order to run these models. So it's a trade-off between the the long-term storage of flash and the high-speed access of a DRAM or high bandwidth memory. So managed retention is seen as a way to try to get around this memory bottleneck, to enable something that can deliver the speed that's required for these AI systems, but you don't need to have the energy requirements, because these types of memories can reliably hold the data for hours or days.
So how might the introduction of managed retention change the economics and scalability of AI data centers?
Managed retention really allows you to have a memory solution that's optimized for AI systems, that can be built on standard CMOS processes. So it's much more economical in order to build than they have to do this high bandwidth memory, which is really a very expensive DRAM process that they have to thin out and then stack on top of each other and then package in order to get that kind of a high bandwidth performance. So if you can come up with a solution that's CMOS compatible, that has the same speeds as DRAM, and has that kind of managed retention capabilities, then it could be a game changer, not just in terms of the cost economics, but also the energy economics.
Where does 40S fit in the evolution of memory technologies then?
Well, we've been really the pioneer about being able to consistently demonstrate a managed retention capability in our memory cell, going back many years. And as David, as you previously just mentioned, we've been also demonstrating performance on par with DRAM in terms of its rewrite performance. So this is something that we've been pursuing using this type of ReRAM called PCMO. It's different than other types of ReRAM, like a Weebit type of a ReRAM. But those types of memories are really targeted for different types of applications. So right now we only see 4DS as being the the technology solution that can really provide this sweet spot of having a managed retention capability, DRAM-like speeds, and the high endurance that you're going to need in order to have these kinds of high reliable AI systems.
Okay, so what can investors look forward to in the next little while coming out of California?
Well, I think you've already mentioned some of the key capstones that are coming up in terms of our work with Infinian on developing a custom memory cell for this technology. And that's really the critical thing. So just being able to demonstrate the technology is super important. But for our semiconductor partners that may eventually license this technology, they need to see it configured in an actual working memory cell. So that's what we're working with Infinian right now. Of course, we've got the 20 nanometer lot that just came out of IMEC, excuse me. In fact, it just shipped last week. So we're anticipating getting that received into California and being able to begin to do that test. That's super important because that will show that we can demonstrate a generational technology in terms of having an area-based ReRAM technology that will scale with each successive technology node. So going from 60, which is our previous generation, 60 nanometers on a side, down to 20 nanometers on a side, we expect to be able to demonstrate the direct scaling in terms of, energy and other parameters.
Yeah, so it's not by fluke that we're working with Infinian. We know that Infinian have been working with TSMC on ReRAM technologies, but it's more an embedded ReRAM. It's not an area-based ReRAM like ours. So there's definitely an interest from them, albeit we are paying them, but an insignificant amount compared to their overall revenue. So there's definitely a level of interest from them. So they've given us 8 of their top engineers to work on this, and the work's already started back in January. And we meet with them once a week. In fact, I'm going up to California in June to sit down with the head of memory with Infinian, and also have access to the COO of iMac, who it's unusual to actually be able to get Rudy, but he's always willing to take a phone call from me or from Peter or from Ting, whoever it might be. So there's a level of interest in both of those companies about what we're doing. So you can't just walk into iMac. You have to have something which is really, really unique in order for them to work with you. They're looking to sort of change the world, these guys, and they can see the future 5 years out, but they won't tell you what it looks like because they're working with all the top companies in the world. But they definitely can see 5 years, 10 years out what's going to be happening. For us to still be working there, and they could take on plenty of clients, trust me. For us to still be working with iMac is really a testament to the uniqueness of what we think we have, and to follow that up with a collaboration with Infinian is really, really important for us, and was something that sort of came out of the blue. So they've been watching what we do for many months, and I was up there in October last year and sat down with them and delayed my trip. Actually, stayed another couple of weeks so we could get this deal over the line with them. So it's a really important transaction for us and a relationship. From a market perspective, our market cap's only $60 million. And when you look at the comparables, we're well below. So as we're moving into results in the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks, I think you're going to see a significant re-rate of the stock. If we get a positive result, I think, we'll be back in the early teens, because that's really what we probably are worth. We're not worth $60 million at the moment. And thankfully for James, he helped fully fund us for the balance of this year. So in the next 6 to 8 weeks, if we get what we're hoping to see in terms of being able to scale down from 60 nanometers to 20, that's really, really significant. And that's something that, someone like an Infinian needs to see. Because if someone's going to acquire the company, they need to know that they're going to have generation 1, generation 2, and generation 3, and generation 4 of a product. And that's what Western Digital, who's one of our joint development partners as well, they talked about ReRAM being a scalable technology. So what they mean by that is that it's a technology that can be scaled over many, many years and many generations. And that's one of the reasons Western Digital were interested in it. They still work with us. We still show them the results. But I think, it's unlikely that, it's Western Digital's got some internal problems, I think. It's more likely an Infinian or someone like that. So I get the impression that Infinian are sort of looking under the bonnet to see what we've got, and they're directing the traffic. But we're telling them what to do, but they've got the skill set that we would never be able to find ourselves, and it would be too expensive for us to find it. So this is a really easy way for us to have a big organisation look at what we're doing. And as I said, I think over the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks, you'll see a significant re-rate in the valuation of the company. Right. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, David. Thanks, Peter. We'll open it up to questions from the floor.
Hi, Peter. It's Steph from Blue Glass. Just a quick question for you. For commercialization with, for example, Infinian, do you have to insert new fab equipment, or are you utilizing standard fab equipment for your process?
Our technology uses standard fab equipment for all of its processes. That's why we call it back-end compatible with any CMOS line that's out there. We're able, the good thing about working with an iMac is that it has advanced equipment that's compatible with all the advanced fabs around the world. So it's one of the things that gives us, credibility, I guess you can say, when we're talking with somebody like an Infinian in terms of being able to be imported into their process. Ting Yen, who's our CTO, he couldn't be here on this call, but his whole career has been in what we call process integration, which is taking these new processes and integrating them into existing fabs around the world. So he has done advanced process integration into leading edge fabs for 30 years. And so he has architected this entire process, not just to make sure that it performs, but just to make sure that it is as seamless as possible when you're looking to integrate it into a fab.
Kevin?
Nobody else? Okay. David, Peter, thanks for your talk there. One question, maybe two parts. If you don't mind sharing, what's your burn rate, and where do you really believe you're going to be from a cash positive perspective? Can you give us a view on that? And if that's an inappropriate question, just table it and say can't talk about it.
No, that's all right. So we've reported we've got $9.1 million to the end of March. So it's a little bit difficult to sort of give an estimate of burn rate because we're still in negotiations with IMAC about what the next steps are going forward. Certainly, we don't have to pay them any more money from the Platform 6 lot, which is a 20 nanometer cell that's coming out, but they will be working closely with Infinian, and that will have a charge associated with it. So we're not aware of what that is at the moment. It's being negotiated, so it's a little bit hard to sort of estimate what our burn rate's going to be. But I think we're going to have enough to get well into 2026, and we'll be able to report hopefully quarterly how we're working with Infinian and what progress we've been able to make. But those three companies, us, Infinian, and IMAC, are all working very, very closely together to try and get this to be a success. Success will look, in the middle of next year if we're able to get through the Infinian process and produce what they're thinking they're going to produce for us. So between now and next year, this is really big, important steps for the company going forward. And I think this is where you're going to see a reflection in the value of the company going forward. Yeah. So at 60 million, I think we have been 320 million before with no data. Now we've got excellent data and we're still capped at 60. So at some point, there's going to be a change.
Mark?
Yeah, thanks. Just following up on that last bit, what needs to happen between now and say middle of next year in terms of development, in terms of checks, testing, that sort of thing, to get there?
Well, Peter can answer that.
Well, we have a time frame already laid out in terms of the milestones for the chip development, and that's a fairly standard process in the semiconductors in terms of going through the architecture and coming up with the various gates in terms of simulation and performance, and some design decisions in terms of how do you actually design this memory cell to be customized for the 4DS process or the 4DS technology. So all of that stuff is going on right now. I think getting through that process will deliver to us very robust design for this memory cell, and that will be backed up by all the simulation data and all of the testing data that we can do in the design phase of the process. And then at that point, then we'll be working with Infinian and IMEC and the foundry in terms of negotiating getting that thing actually built, so we can do the testing of the actual memory cell itself, and that will take us into 2026, like David was talking about.
This was always something we're going to have to do. We're always going to have to find a partner like Infinian to take this forward. So we're quite lucky that we actually have. It was quite surprising, actually.
I think it's. Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to mention that when we were out last year and talking about our progress, the goal at that time was to find a partner to work with us on developing this memory cell to this next logical step. So the fact that Infinian came to us late last year and said, "Hey, we've been watching you guys. Maybe we think that there's something here," is really significant. And let me just say a little bit about a company like Infinian, which is a memory company, very well established in the semiconductor space. They will have a whole, a library of different memory technologies at their disposal at all times, and they evaluate all of the new memory technologies that are on the horizon. So they always have the opportunities to explore new technologies, far beyond what 4DS can do. So the fact that they decided to give one of their development slots to us through this partnership is significant. It does mean that they think that there's something there, so they are very much of an active partner in terms of helping us realize this this process of turning our really promising technology into an actually working memory cell.
I've been penalized the last question. So, Peter, first of all, interesting stuff you got going on there. There's been a lot of work in ReRAM in the last 5 years plus. Where do you see yourselves right now in the competitive landscape? Can you give us a feeling for that?
Yeah, I just briefly alluded to it before that said that Weebit was really targeting different applications than what we're targeting. And there's a whole field of emerging memories, but just focusing on ReRAM for now. So there's really two different technology camps within ReRAM. The main one that most people use is called filamentary, and Weebit falls into this area where you're actually forming filaments, conductive filaments through an oxide in order to program it on or off. And that is the basis for how those memories work. They become like flash memory replacements and for flash memory type applications, which are longer term storage that can be that can basically replace flash as flash runs out of steam as it gets to smaller and smaller technology nodes. That's really the impetus behind those traditional ReRAMs. Ours is area based, which means that we're programming based on the entire area of the cell. So when we go from 60 nanometers down to 20 nanometers, the amount of that area shrinks by 1/9 or 9x. And so this is what we're talking about in terms of showing the scalability and the generational capabilities of this technology to go to smaller and smaller nodes. So that difference in terms of how the technology works is kind of fundamental between us and the other ReRAM companies. It's also kind of the basis for why our performance is so good in terms of how can we get these DRAM performances in terms of write performance, especially for for this memory cell. It really gives us a lot of promise for going forward.
Thanks, Peter. We might wind it up there, David.
1 minute to go.
Final comments, David?
It's fine. So I think we're probably the most advanced area-based ReRAM technology in the world, as far as we're aware.
Very good.
Yeah.
I think we're the only area-based ReRAM.
I was going to say, I didn't want to overstate it, Peter, but anyway, you say it.
And hence the most advanced.
Yes.
Well done.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Peter.